Dear attenders, dear guests of the conference Music and Change Before and After 1900, both here live and online, I would like to welcome you to the second day of this conference. Now we will listen Emilija, no, I will try, Sakadolskienė.
Very good.
Thank you so much. She studied music education in Chicago and Maryland, and now she teaches at Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas and Vilnius University. And she will try to answer the question, why are musicologists no longer active participants in educational matters? And the title of her presentation today is, Where Have All the Scholars Gone?
Good morning. As we mentioned in our panel abstract in 2014, yes, Giuseppina Lafaccia delivered a keynote address at a conference for musicians and musicologists in Bologna titled Musicology and Music Pedagogy, an Unnatural Divorce. And according to the author, you see her quote here, musicology and pedagogic didactic studies have chosen and gone down parallel paths that only seldom meet. The damage is for all to see. I was recently reminded of this yesterday when listening to Gintautas Mažeikis' keynote address on the dialectics of music and popular revolutions, and a portion of his paper dealt with intuition, in which he cited Humboldt and Adorno. And I'm wondering whether Professor Mažeikis or any of his listeners have heard of scholars writing about intuition in education or music education. For example, all the scholars that are listed on this slide. In fact, people like Nell Noddings have written an entire book on intuition and education. Wayne Bowman did a study of Michael Polanyi's Tacit Dimensions of Learning and the exploration of intuitive knowledge in music teaching and learning. Or Malcolm Tate and Paul Hack, who acknowledged intuition as part of the feeling mode in music learning. Donald Schoen describes the reflective practitioner as one who is not just skillful or competent, but whose work involves intuition, insight, and artistry. According to Mari McCarthy, the topic of intuition is found in the discourse of several disciplines, such as education, psychology, aesthetics, spirituality, business, management, and information technology. I'm fairly confident that those listening to me today have not heard of these authors, which reinforces Lafaccia's point that we travel in parallel paths that unfortunately do not meet. Yet I'm now encroaching on my colleague Rūta Girdzijauskienė's topic, in which she will more closely examine the content of academic inquiry. Therefore, I return to the topic of this conference, which is change before and after 1990. I'm assuming that the organizers had in mind a comparison between Soviet and post-Soviet realities, or we can frame this as colonial and post-colonial if we'd like even more layers. Yet music education had established important traditions centuries earlier. Lithuanians celebrate 1397, the date of initial documentation of the Vilnius Cathedral School, as the beginning of formal European-style education system in Lithuania. In addition to lessons in rhetoric, dialectics, mathematics, and the readings of classic texts, boys learned ecclesiastical chant and received suitable musical training to sing in church choirs and became music teachers. Some also learned to play the organ. In 1569, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland formed the Federated Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and more than 200 Catholic parish schools existed in the Lithuanian-speaking portion of the Commonwealth. In a letter to the Vatican in 1646, the head of the Žemaitija bishopric reported that almost every church has a school taught by rectors and bachelors who teach catechism, the 10 Commandments, all the obligations of Christian devotion, grammar, music, and other sciences which develop children's talents, end of quote. Under Tsarist Russia, a secret network of Lithuanian schools functioned for 40 years in which children were taught reading, writing, and counting. They were taught to sing Catholic hymns as well as Lithuanian folk songs. Song collections were provided by book smugglers, and church organists taught basic music literacy and organized choruses. Records of searches by Russian authorities reveal that folk song collections, music notebooks, and music manuscripts and hymnals were among the confiscated materials found at the secret school sites. With the re-establishment of an independent Lithuanian state in 1918, the task of creating an educational system based on national culture was taken on immediately. Folk music was the basis of music instruction, through which children learned to sing with good intonation, to read notation in a one-octave range, and to independently write down a single-voiced melody. Composer and musicologist Juozas Žilevičius, often referred to as the father of Lithuanian music education, headed the Department of the Arts at the Ministry of Education in 1920. Like Zoltán Kodály in Hungary, he strongly discouraged the use of foreign melodies before children had developed what he called a Lithuanian world group. Žilevičius stated in 1923, "Film projector of the Lithuanian character, and song is everything to a Lithuanian." There is a lingering, recurring theme. Each era represented a new attempt at asserting national identity, the preservation of native language, and the heritage of song. Consistent efforts to remain in the face of Latin, Polish, German, Russian culture have also colored the history of Lithuanian music education even before we enter the Soviet era. So I present some colorful vignettes from Soviet-era music education, but we must keep in mind that several centuries of tradition could not be completely erased. The undercurrent of preserving a national identity through music remained, despite some draconian measures. It should be acknowledged that the Soviet government understood what could not be attained by reasoning and requirement could be instilled by art and artistic activity. Impelling and emotionally charged musical performances and the optimistic and pretentious setting of Soviet holidays might not have been convincing, but it disposed audiences positively. Composers created ostentatious work praising communism, and all were required to sing the anthems of the Soviet Union and Soviet Lithuania. Schools staged competitions for the best performances of such works, which have been termed a culture of facades. Which became commonplace, and music was an inseparable part of such celebrations, meetings, and demonstrations. The arts and education were important tools in the anchoring of Soviet ideology. While Lithuanian composers enjoyed less censure than other art forms because of the abstract nature of music, especially instrumental music, schools were required to use texts that adulated social realism, and numerous oratorios, cantatas, and songs extolled the bright tomorrows of communism and the Soviet state. In one text, Kostas Kobylinskas implores, "Love the party, my child, the way you love your mother. It protects you like a tender bud in this land of Lenin." When I bring in music textbooks to show my pre-service university music education students, I'm always amazed at their reaction. They cannot believe that this type of indoctrination could have taken place. I'm so happy to be a little Octoberist, to be a little grandson of Lenin. The red star is firmly fastened to my chest. In times of war, the Komsomol went to battle with such stars. All of mankind yearns to see a similar star that sits atop the Kremlin towers. Or Lenin's son, bright and solitary. You are cherished by all and eternal. However, there were important changes in the 70s. Although travel from the Soviet Union was severely restricted and study abroad was almost non-existent, Lithuanian educators resourcefully picked up elements of the music teaching systems of Emil Dalkros, Zoltán Kodály, and Karl Orff from foreign colleagues who brought publications and from short visits abroad. Despite the fact that Lithuanian music teachers could not form a deeper and more meaningful understanding of international music education methods because of a lack of information and censure of Western ideas, even fragmentary applications did much to revive Lithuanian music education. The thaw allowed for the introduction of a Lithuanian music education curriculum that differed from the other republics of the Soviet Union. The author of the new curriculum, Edvardas Balčytis, describes the goal of music education in general education, to provide pupils a level of musicianship necessary for everyday life, to teach all students rudimentary but tasteful singing, to listen with meaning and to perceive music aesthetically, to encourage musicking, to cultivate artistic taste and the need for folk and professional music of high quality, and to educate a person of superior aesthetic and spiritual culture. Today, that does not sound revolutionary, but it was in that era. The music curriculum was not met with enthusiasm by ideologues of the time. Balčytis describes a meeting in 1977 with the Minister of Education, Antanas Rimkus, who had evaluated the textbook series. And you see that encounter described in this slide. I thought the most interesting reason for disapproval of the music textbooks was that music is presented from an objectivist position as a shared human phenomenon, whereas we must present it from a position of class consciousness. Well, I could go on discussing the curiosities of the Soviet era. I want to consider one aspect which I liked in the Soviet era and which I find absent today. I remember the press of those years, and as I returned to those articles, I realized how actively musicians and musicologists participated in discussions on music education. This was not only in publications for readers like Tarybinė mokykla, the Soviet school, or Tarybinis mokytojas, the Soviet teacher, but in intellectual and cultural press like Literatūra ir menas, literature and art, Kultūros barai, the domains of culture, or Pergalė, triumph, which is where the question in my title comes from. Where have all the scholars gone? Why do we no longer find the interesting polemics regarding music education, and what are the consequences? Let's recall two case in points. One involves Russian composer Dmitry Kabalevsky. The year is 1982. And the so-called Kabalevsky System, which was an alternative to the ideas of Western educators such as Orff Kodai and Jacques Dalcroze. His system is not widely known in the West, but there are a few articles in English. The system seems to be a direct reaction to earlier music programs which excessively stressed music theory or were limited to song singing and caused students to turn away because of the undue emphasis on literacy. The main components of the Kabalevsky system were listening to masterpieces of music and discussions about them, since the aim was to prepare a music listener, not a performer. It was suggested that only more talented students should be encouraged toward performance, and children would never be able to perform at the level that could be encountered in a recording. Pupils in the first grade were introduced to the lyric song, the dance, and the march, which Kabalevsky considered the basis of all musical forms. He called these forms the three whales of music, referring to an ancient Russian legend that says the earth rests on the back of three whales, a metaphor that would be repeatedly lampooned. This led to further discussions of the symphony, opera, and so on. The upper grades were presented with lessons such as music and revolution, poetry and music, film and music. Proponents of the Kabalevsky system criticized the Orff and Kodai methods for limiting the curricular to music that students could perform. The Kabalevsky system purportedly strove for the union of listening and performance by singing themes, performing rhythm patterns, and reproducing other elements of the masterpieces. As reported in the daily newspaper Tiesa in 1983, 11,000 schools in Russia and 1,000 schools in the other republics used the Kabalevsky system. But most respected musicians in Lithuania actively opposed it. Balčytis continued to defend his system of comprehensive musicianship and opposed lesson material being subjugated to the understanding of the world classics. Among the leading musical figures who joined in was the director of the famed Ąžuoliukas boys choir, Vytautas Miškinis. In a 1983 issue of Kultūros Barai, he criticized the disproportionate attention to music listening at the expense of vocal performance. Vytautas Lygutas, in the May 24, 1980 issue of Literatūra ir Menas, asks, should we teach music or about music? The most colorful critique was penned by musicologist and later the first leader of independent Lithuania, Vytautas Landsbergis, in which he stated that musical understanding can not be dished out like bagels. The article was titled, 2 Whales and 40 Bagels. Children must experience the joy of music by active participation, and discussions about music proposed by Kabalevsky would not accomplish this, according to Landsbergis, which is in line with today's theorists of music education that support praxial pedagogy. The Kabalevsky system never gained a foothold in Lithuania, and considering that this was the early 1980s, the pre-Gorbachev era of Brezhnev, Andropov, and Chernenko, it is quite remarkable that the discussions were so open. I dare say that the intervention of that decade's musical intelligentsia was crucial in preserving a system that differed from the rest of the Soviet Union. Another case that evoked lively discussion was Albertas Piličiauskas' articles and books about music education. I had the opportunity to be present at the book's oral review in 1985. The auditorium of the Lithuanian Composers Union was packed. As in the Kabalevsky case, the interested parties included not only music educators. Conductor, performer, and musicologist Donatas Katkus, psychologist Eugenijus Laudinaitis, and others found it necessary to present views that oppose those of Piličiauskas' writings. The idea that you must create narratives to help understand music met with harsh criticism and forced many to consider the didactics of musical perception. Jonas Bruveris, in the March 14, 1981 issue of Literatūra ir Menas, stated that the opinion that the ability to verbalize personal experiences constitutes the cognition of the art of music, which was a tenet of Piličiauskas, was simply naive. On June 3, 1981, Vakarinės naujienos, the evening news, printed an official statement signed by musicologists stating that the changing subjective moods and emotions that are aroused by music cannot reveal the genuine specifics of music, content, and artistic music imagery, or to help the listener understand the language of music. Lina Dumbliauskaitė, in 1980 and 1981 issues of Literatūra ir Menas, actively confronted Piličiauskas regarding the artificial links between emotion and musical content. And much earlier, even before the discussion with Albertas Piličiauskas in 1977, Vytautas Landsbergis in Literatūra ir Menas wrote that most probably schools are the only ones that have not rejected the naive question, what did the artist want to say? I could go on to several discussions about music in school curricula. Lithuanians in the audience will recognize the names of Saulius Sondeckis, Gracijus Pauga, Vytautas Gaidamavičius, Lionginas Šepetys, Donatas Katkus, and others. It should be noted that musicologists' attention to issues of music education did not end abruptly in 1990. For a while, the journal Gamma, edited by musicologist Laimutė Ligeikaitė, provided a platform for interesting discussions. I've tried to find some reasons for the withdrawal of musicologists from the public discourse on music education. One possibility is this. After 1990, there was a whole slew of doctoral dissertations in music education. Many of these doctoral students came from backgrounds in music teaching, choral conducting, or vocal and piano performance. Musicologists and theories were usually not among them. Once the separate community of music educationists was established, those that had been participating in the discourse simply withdrew. Quite possibly, they decided that this new community would deal with music education issues and their input was no longer needed. And so, music education and the educational sciences in general landed in the sphere of social sciences, losing their roots that had been grounded in the humanities. Consequently, music education has diminished its links to music aesthetics and philosophy, which are musicological disciplines that contemplate musical meaning and value. Once music education becomes a social science, future doctors studied the philosophy of education, but theories that examine the philosophy of beauty and art, musical experience, meaning, and interpretation became peripheral. This separation from musicology created music educationists that were poorly acquainted with the latest literature on music aesthetics that examined time, location, perception, symbols, or the possibilities of semiotic analysis. We barely see scholarly work on the anthropological function or sociological content of music or the development of musical identity that have gained attention in international music education. Instead, we see a continuation of subject-oriented didactics that does not bother to ask how pupils will use what they were learning in music classes 20 years from now. When music education loses its sociological, philosophical, aesthetic, or even functional grounding, it is easy to subjugate music lessons to other purposes. Those that propose music will improve math scores or emotional intelligence or moral character often ignore the study of the meaning of music or for its own sake. We would be wise to remember the words of sociologist Vytautas Kavolis, who says that social agents that use art for their own purposes can curtail art's capability to function as art. That usually happens when social agents successfully limit art to certain consciously established and intended functional tasks. I will shorten this. And because my time is up, in any case, I think you have understood my whim to have musicians and musicologists return to the discourse of music education, not just in specialized music schools, but in general education as well, where we should be nurturing the self-aware, intuitive, and creative music consumers of tomorrow. But I would also like to add that such episodes of Soviet nostalgia that I described today are few and far between. We all realize that for the most part, we now have what is quite preferable to what we had. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Emilija. Questions? Also, I would like to encourage our guests online, like Paolo, Gloria, and so on, to participate with questions. Please, from the attendants, people that attend the conference. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Emilija. Thank you for your interesting presentation and historical review. So if we imagine that musicologists do return to a music education field, what is their role here? What can they do and how can they help music educators?
Well, I think at forums like this that are I think we have a lot of interdisciplinary sessions at this conference as well. And I just, discussing and sitting down with the same people in the same room, talking about these things, I think would be important. And I think, Rūta, I was talking to this morning, she's very happy that her music education program is now in the humanities again, rather than the social sciences, because she can return to those things. So when I think when we're talking about the preparation of doctoral students, if they're in the arts or arts education, maybe they should have a more firm grounding in the humanities, not just in the social sciences. And when we prepare teachers, we should be very conscious of their dual role, because you can't separate them from the social sciences, because we're talking about not teaching music, but teaching a child. But I think we're getting further and further away from that humanities grounding in teacher education. So I think there's all kinds of forums where we could think about returning to that closer tie. And maybe, I don't know, maybe musicologists will have an awakening and start looking at what is going on in schools, because now, they've completely looked away and gone on to other issues. So.
Any other questions? I just will have a short question. How is the situation considering this in Germany, in Austria, in France, or in Great Britain? How do the scholars are dealing with those issues that you are presenting? This is the situation in Lithuania, which I classify, let's say now, Lithuania as a Nordic country. But what about countries of Western or Central Europe, like Austria, for example?
I'm probably less acquainted with the countries of Central Europe. Rūta would be better equipped to ask that, but when I look at North America or the Anglo-Saxon countries, the music education students sit aside musicology students, aside composers, in the same classrooms, listening to lectures on music history, music theory, aesthetics, and there is less separation even during the study process. Here, pianists have their own music history class, vocalists have a simplified music history class. Music education students are also separated so that there is no physical meeting of these students, especially in Lithuania. And there's a lot more of that going on in the West. So there's much more contact with other music disciplines. They're not as isolated in the music education world.
Yeah, that seems correct because I'm teaching music history in Austria, in Graz, and I have both instrumentalist and music pedagogy students. Just the musicologists, that they are from the, let's say, not from the music university, but from the main university, they have a special music history lesson. But yeah, I can say it's really great. Any more?
So about this, what's happened in Lithuania, it's a small country, and that's why we have two research areas, social sciences and musicology. If there are in biggest countries, for example, in Austria, I have some colleagues in Mozarteum, and in Poland, in Germany, they have separate research area music pedagogy, where both sides, musicology and music and social sciences meet each other. Now we are really very separated by all research areas, all research projects and disciplines against. And our teachers our teachers' educations mostly is in universities. And in Austria, in music institutions and academies, it is quite normal, not in Lithuania. It is problem of small country, I suppose.
Thank you so much. We continue with Arvydas, and now it's going to be difficult. Girdzijauskas. Yes. He started choral conducting, and he lectures at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatres in Klaipėda. And his research interest includes school culture and development of public cultural competence. Today, he will speak about music making for the quality of school life and about the integration of music making into school life, which can contribute to students' well-being. So, please.
Well, hello, everybody. So I'm choir conductor, as I was introduced, and I'm the school principal and music teacher for many years, and I've been working at school, which was established for special purpose to have more music and more arts, and now it has theater programs as well, not for professional development, but for personal development and for development of personal culture. And I'm working in this field for more than 25 years. And actually, every day coming to school, I'm asking one question myself: what for we teach music? Because actually, this question is always open-ended. We know that musical training in comprehensive schools usually is not related with students' future studies or occupation. It is not for profession. And music has no impact on graduation from school and enrollment to universities. And motivation for learning and teaching music in comprehensive school is not very high. Yes. So, but having in mind this not very optimistic context, we think that music teaching can perform and could perform other functions not related to exams and future occupation. Usually in answering this question, we discuss influence of music on academic outcomes. Well, I know that this is well criticized, this question, and we do not think that we do teach music for outcomes of mathematics. But anyway, however, music activities are not isolated. They are in context of other activities and other fields of life. And at our school, Vidūno Gymnasium in Klaipėda, we practice music and other arts for more than 20 years, and we feel impact of music and arts on the school life, its quality. So in this survey, we focus on cultural features of music education. Present studies trying to answer questions. Might music teaching and learning be considered as means of raising school life quality, and can music making integrated into the school life in different levels, like integrated lessons, creative activities, projects, and shared principles change school life and school culture? Well, answering these questions, I performed kind of ethnographic inquiry, studying school documents, having discussion with teachers working at school more than 10 years, and with having questionnaire to older students. So the context and legal basis for music teaching is quite important. We know that in general curriculum, we have one lesson for music teaching in upper grades, and we can have 2 lessons in lower grades, but activities as music making, choirs, ensembles, orchestras are not encouraged and not very often met at schools. So therefore we try to develop some documents to somehow protect and legalize our stressed music program. And we have one of main documents at school is the concept of development of humanistic culture by means of artistic activities. It was created in 2012 and generalizing our experiences we had for more than 20 years. So what we find in this document, it defines the ways of integration of music teaching and other artistic activities into the school life and teaching practice. And it states that skills, values, and behaviors, behavioral patterns acquired through artistic activities, while transferred into other realms of life and education, became a key factor in personality formation and basis of personal culture, and describes activities of classes, actually the class culture development groups, which consist of the class teacher as leader of these groups, and music or art or theater teacher, and other 2 or 3 subject teachers, which plan common integrated activities and implement them during the school year. So these are specific practices which are maybe can be an example of our school-specific life, and somehow it forms the results of these musical practices at our school. What other documents are important? I should say that annual plans of cultural development groups, they prepare every September, and now our teachers are working on that. So each class has culture development group, and the group develops its annual plan of activities based on integration of subjects and musical activities as staging of tales and stories created by children, creative interpretations of books and movies, creative projects involving students and parents, integrated lessons, and at school or in museums, exhibition halls, and many other projects are presented in these plans and implemented. And it has to be combined with annual class teacher program, which have much more fields, including cooperation with parents, preparation to school activities, self-management, safety, prevention programs, and so on. So our class teachers are really busy. These documents help to organize our school life with more arts, with more music in a legal way. We are protected from some inspections and some maybe restrictions from our education department or ministry people. And implementing those programs actually create some positive atmosphere, which is felt at our school. And now I want to tell a little bit about opinion of teachers. What do they feel at school and how do these documents work in reality? So we had the discussion with 14 teachers working in gymnasium more than 10 years and suggested for discussion several topics. And we quite often hear that anybody entering our school can feel some difference from other schools, and these differences are quite obvious. And the first topic was the question, what are the differences at our school that teachers can feel, and what can they tell in comparison with other schools? Because some of them work not only at our school, but at other schools as well. So first thing what they stressed was the sense of commonness and collaboration, which bring teacher and students closer together. A good example of teacher communication, sincerity and respectfulness is conveying to students, and what's important, teachers do not compete, they more collaborate. The other statement is that integrity of gymnasium from 1st to 12th grade enables personal example of big to small, of older students to younger, transferability of same values, the same direction of efforts of parents, children, teachers, and administration, active communication with parents who are culturally orientated accordingly. Specific children in culture and for culture, attending cultural events, constant presence in cultural activities result that behavioral culture is high. They know what culture is, warm, cozy, communication is typical. Creative aesthetic environment results in tolerance. Children care for surroundings they have created themselves. Felt value of creativity comes from concerts, exhibitions, opportunity to be on stage, and sense of freedom comes from creativity as well. We are not afraid to break standards, to be different. Freedom comes from responsibility. Children are looser and bolder, liberated by activities, experiences, and free choice, freedom of choice. Respectful treatment of children is transferred to children communication and creative activities. There is no bullying compared to other schools. Later we'll see that children have different opinion on that field, but teachers state that our relations are more friendly. And what was mentioned, that our children are beautiful, not in their appearance, but their light, some light in their eyes, understanding, less panic. The same goes for teachers. Art helps to focus on an idea, and art teaches thinking. Well, the other topic we discussed with teachers was what traits of students do we develop through music and artistic activities? How children are different from their peers in other schools. So the first thing mentioned was creativity, the ability to think originally and in art and in life. Initiative manifested through creative self-expression and rich imagination. Courage to be authentic, different, bolder, to express oneself and to make maybe mistakes, to create oneself, your personality in different ways, to work in a group, able for cooperation, harmonious relation, communication, consensus, to feel responsibility for the result and for the group, before the group, knows how to achieve the goal, to implement activities to an end, and achieves final result, which is important in music. Respect related to responsibility, tolerance to others, to works of their peers and colleagues, and leads to cultured behavior and some etiquette. Ability of perception of world through art, to recognize reflection of life in art, observation of details, critical thinking in the study of works of art. And developed emotional sensitivity, deeper, higher quality of taste is formed, ability to enjoy the result of others, to share and delight, and sense of beauty. So you see that our teachers are not very critical about our children. We have, of course, different children, but the general picture is quite positive. And the last question we discussed with children, the last topic, was influence of artistic activities on academic achievement. This question is oftenly discussed, and what's important that teachers were quite, to say, modest about in answering this question, and they stressed principles that govern both artistic and academic activities, that they could be related and they can help in academic studies as well. Ability to work, critical thinking and reflection, variety of ways of performance. Our children are not usually tied to one way of solving problem. They look for variety of ways and variety of solution, ability to work with others, motivation to achieve final result, ability to hear intonations, to be emotionally sensitive, and students who receive their 100 evaluations from state exams, the highest evaluations. We have 3 of them at school, the highest achievement of our academic efforts. So all 3 of them played piano, and which is, I think, interesting to mention that Einstein played violin as well. So music instruments somehow are related with some mental activities. Well, and going to an end, I must tell something about our statements which were stressed by children. They had questionnaire with first part, ask students for their opinion on statements reflecting school life, and the highest evaluation got statements that our gymnasium has exceptional atmosphere and communication culture. Artistic activities foster communication and collaboration, especially communication is stressed by children. And participating in artistic activities helps to get to know myself better, reveal my personal strengths and weaknesses, and the artistic activities I participate help to develop my important personal qualities. The most negative attitude of students was to the statement that artistic orientation of the gymnasium reduces level of bullying among students. They still are thinking that their relations could be better and the attitude to each other could be better. And another statement, which I suppose shows that they were quite critical answering these questions, that it was the statement that our artistic groups achieve outstanding artistic results. Of course, we do not achieve outstanding artistic results at school, and we do not seek that. Our artistic activities are for personal and cultural purposes, and they were quite critical that they said, no, we do not achieve very high artistic results. And they were quite critical about statement that participating in artistic activities and those meet joy and satisfaction. They know that musical activities are not very easy thing, and it needs efforts. But they were doubtful about skills required in artistic activities, how they are useful for learning subjects, other subjects. The second part of questionnaire were open-ended questions, and they were asked what important personal qualities do participation in musical activities develop. So they stress communication, tolerance, self-confidence, creativity, patience, imagination, empathy, and you can read more. So the next. Yeah, and in the question, what are most striking features of artistic activity in gymnasium life, they also stressed tolerance, commonality, creative mood, freedom, atmosphere, and color of atmosphere, openness, beautiful environment, friendliness. What memorable artistic impressions did I experience at school? Choir concerts, final presentation of artworks, staging of musical preparation for centenary. Centenary is celebrated when 100 years is left to Abitur, and 11th grade make some event to Abitur students, and usually it is very serious and very creative and inventive. Performance of oratorio, exhibition, song festival, community, and simply happiness, participating in all these activities. So there they were not so critical, and suggestion for organizing artistic activities at school. More cooperation, still more cooperation between groups and schools, more creative activities, contemporary art, film, and dance reviews, presentations of rare arts, learning about fashion, public speaking, hearing students' opinion, exhibitions with music, etc. So in short, This is a picture of our school. And, well, maybe we answered the question, can music making integrated into the school life change its quality?
Thank you so much, Arvydas. Any questions? Yes.
If I correctly understood, you mentioned that you into this integrated activities, you also involve teachers from other disciplines.
Yes.
Could you give a specific example of a successful case?
For example, one of our class leaders, class teachers, last school year organized some teaching days in our exhibition hall, where art exhibitions are presented, and teachers prepared their lessons of mathematics, of foreign language, of arts, which were performed and implemented in this exhibition hall, in this surrounding, and in relation with artworks which were presented. So one of examples. The other, I suppose, standing example, every year, 9th graders make artistic presentation of new poetry books. And it is public, and it's related with theater, with music, with filming, with poetry, and usually it is in public library and overcrowded, and everybody wants to see that. So, and many examples.
Any more questions?
Thank you. I would like to ask you about your school pupils, what they do in the future, what ways mostly they choose, or they go to study to music academy, or maybe to Vilnius art academy, or maybe they go to medicine to study. Or do you know about their what they do in the future? Thank you.
Actually, I think that it's more important for us not what do they do, but how do they do, because we try to develop some personal qualities which could be helpful in any field of occupation, and these fields are very, very different. We have very successful students in programming, and one of them works in Switzerland in Google. Some studied in music academy, but not so much. We have some composers and music teachers and musicologists even, and in theater department of music and theater academy. Yeah, and sound engineering, but of course doctors, and of course lawyers, and all kinds of occupation and studies. And we usually hear that they continue participating in culture and in musical activities, which is important, I think, for not only for quality of school life, but for quality of life in general.
If there are no questions, I would like also one to make. This seems to be a long-term project. Do you have any cooperations with other countries that they do similar stuff, that they try to achieve the same goals, probably with the same way? Is there any cooperation with any other music school?
Yes, we do have some cooperation. We have some relations and long-term relations with Germany as an Verden gymnasium, which has more arts and music and dance especially, and Pina Bausch is from this gymnasium, and we have some relations with Finland, but I should say that it's not very often to meet the school which with this culturally stressed programs and with this direction of music and art education, and we are looking for such cooperation, and if we find such schools, we very dear that the relation and this connection.
My father was also a gymnasium, not teacher at the beginning, then director, and they had this Comenius program, and he visited also Finland and Cyprus and other countries. I'm from Greece, so maybe Comenius program. Yeah. I've met Greeks that came here for this Comenius program in Panorama. So those programs seems to function between, let's say, Lithuania and other countries.
Yeah, we have these programs as well and participate in projects. And I suppose that in nowadays, the STEAM movement is very helpful for integration of arts and sciences. And we try to participate in these projects and encourage more and more
Very good.
schools and
Very
people
good.
to join that.
Thank you so much. Now we continue with Rūta Girdzijauskienė. Thank you so much. She's a professor at the Academy of Klaipėda. Yeah. Faculty, and her scientific interests include primary music education, musical creativity, and teacher education. Today she will speak about when music education meets musicology.
So, hello everyone. Thank you at the very beginning. Thank you for a perfect pronunciation of my second name. For the first time, foreign colleague do so well. So it is nice to be in the conference, Musicologist conference, and to participate in educational sections. And three of us are colleagues, and we decided that this section could be interesting and for us to present our ideas in different contexts, not only in educational contexts, but in musicologistic also. And also it is interesting to hear opinion and share ideas with colleagues, musicians. So, and our sessions will be is in perfect classical three-part form. Emilija started from the connections between music education and musicology, and also I continue this idea. And Emilija talked about this period until 90s, and my ideas and my discussion would be more about what happened after 90s. So, and 30 years of independence have changed the landscape of music education in Lithuania. And environments become more global, fast-paced and competitive, and all cultural and educational processes became more complex. Contradictory demands become more increasingly silent and persistent. Challenges of this period in different fields, also in music education, raise multiple tensions. Both musicians and educators' responses to these tensions may be a fundamental determinant of the fate of music education. The principal idea of my presentations is coherent music education, when music education and musicology support each other. Music education needs musicology for music as an academic subject at school in order to have a strong foundation in music theory. Facing music world includes concepts, laws, facts, theories, and interpretations in line with the contemporary level of science of music. And finally, music, but not about music, should be taught, as Emilija mentioned in the first presentation. The relationship between music education and musicology has been never very strong, at least in Lithuania, and recently it has been hard to notice at all. Today, I will try to describe the reasons for the loss of that relationship and propose some actions to be taken for the sake of coherent music education. From the perspective of music education, no less than 10 reasons could be named why music education and musicology lost interest in each other. I will focus on 4 of them. In my opinion, they are the most important. The first is change in the philosophical background of education. Over the last 30 years, positivism has been gradually replaced by social constructivism and posthumanism. 5 decades of unified and ideologically oriented music instructions opened up to diverse educational ideas and child-centered pedagogy. The most pronounced change can be noted in the general educational music curricula, in music textbooks, and other instructional materials. On one hand, social constructivism draws attention to learner to his or her agency in the learning processes. The needs, interests, and the sociocultural context of the learner have become the central axis of educational processes. Education became a multidimensional phenomenon. On the other hand, the clarity of educational goals and content inherent in positivism has made it possible to look at music teaching from the standpoint of the science of music. The shift to postmodernism and social constructivism has diverted attention to the content of music teaching, with the increasing emphasis placed on learning and learner. Simultaneously, with a change in educational paradigm, the attitude toward teacher, learner, the purpose of education, and the content, principles, and practices of teaching has also been changing. The positivist-oriented traditional approach was based on the attitude of impact, influence of one person on another. Subject teaching and teachers' professionalism were understood as the most important guarantors of the quality of education. In the second case, contemporary modern education, it is observed that the teaching learning processes is most effective when the content of education consists with the interests, needs, and inclinations of the learner. Emphasis is placed on experiential knowledge, recognizing that cognition takes place through the person's own construction of knowledge of the world. The focus of the discussion in this case became not on what to teach, but on how to teach. Remembering the idea of this presentation, coherent music education, education is in position of power. Is it good? Yes, but when considering music learning and learner, it is necessary to keep in mind that the subject of music, its content, and the logic of its cognition. That's why a deep and meaningful discussion between musicians and music educators would be relevant on the challenges to the contemporary music education, the aim of music education, the moods of its implementation, and the ways that various institutions and individuals can contribute to its implementation. The second reason about which I would like to talk, the content of music education. Music education employ a variety of strategies when selecting the repertoire and other educational materials to use in their teaching. Regardless of the means, teachers should exercise care when selecting music because music is the nucleus of the curricula. While any selection can pose some or other challenges, nonetheless, educators are expected to infuse the curriculum with music of various styles and from various cultures. If a few decades ago, classical and folk music were at the center of the learning content, it is now recognized that music education encompasses a much wider range of musical experiences. That's why deep music knowledge needs selection of teaching content. What is the situation in Lithuania? Let's talk about music textbook. The tradition of teaching from textbooks is still viable. Two aspects should be discussed here: publishing music textbooks and teachers' individual selection of teaching materials. Why write textbooks? Parishes highlight 5 advantages of using a textbook in the teaching learning processes. Lithuanian teachers, as a result of my study taken 4 years ago, also agree with these statements, adding another important aspects of using textbooks: saving time for lesson preparation. How are textbooks developed? For that purpose, both successful practicing teachers, experts, and scholars in one or another area are invited. In both cases, there are advantages and disadvantages to such choice. Practicing teachers have a good understanding of reality of education and the opportunities and needs of students. However, their work experience does not always enable them to have a general view on the teaching processes, to understand teaching by a conceptual approach to educational processes, and to select material based on the criteria of value, meaningfulness, and purpose. Comprehensive understanding of educational processes, knowledge of the teaching material, and validity of its selection are the strengths of scholars. In this case, however, there is often a lack of practical knowledge of teaching processes as well as student needs and opportunities. This is a strength of practical teachers. In Lithuania, we have 10 sets of textbooks prepared by different authors. In only one case, where the textbooks prepared by a team of authors from different areas. In the remaining 9 cases, they presented the position of one author in relation to music education, representing a musical or educational approach to music teaching. To the coherent music education, discussion and collaboration work of musicians and educators on the concept of music textbooks, and collaborative work in order to develop high-quality teaching learning tools. So, and some remarks: how do music teachers select teaching material? Last spring, when schools were pushed into the online teaching situation, teachers faced a number of challenges. One of the good moments was sharing music teaching materials. Music theaters, concert halls, and music publishing houses opened their resources. Teachers shared lessons preparation materials. How were the online resources used? As revealed a group discussion with music teachers, music material were seldom used in the teaching process because cognition of music requires an educational context. Teachers admitted to lacking the time and ability to do that. The information prepared and shared by teachers were in many cases unsystematic and low quality. The main argument for the selection of the material was that children like it. It is more than evident that there is an obvious contradiction and tension between the abundance of teaching material and the ability of teachers to select, organize, and present it. Teachers often feel confused. That's why selecting music and other materials should be not viewed as informative of scale. So, as we started to talk about teachers, let's continue discussion about identity of music teacher and teachers' education. Just 15 years ago, in the discussion of the professional competence of music teacher in Lithuania, the participants used to support one of two options. One group emphasized the musical abilities of music teacher, while other prioritize the general competence of the pedagogue. Currently, the question of what is more important for music teacher to be more simple. Changes in education and to be a teacher or musician seems to be too simple. Changes in education role encourage looking for new answers to well-known question. What qualities and abilities should be characteristic of music teacher? There is no single answer to this question. The profession of music teacher is manifold, depending on multiple factors that influence the activity of a music teacher. A music pedagogue at the comprehensive school participated not only in lessons, but also in the organization of school community events, music educational processes, extracurriculum activities, pupils' leisure time, and non-formal education. A survey carried out with 102 music teachers from comprehensive schools in Lithuania divided pedagogical activities in two categories: classroom work of the music teacher and cultural activities at school. All the research participants understood music teachers' activity as a broad and multi-sided, however lacking specificity and definedness. So let's ask once more time what the music teacher is, musician or pedagogue. Identity of the music teacher and music teacher's training also could be a very important discussion. Pellegrino indicated a problem of music teacher double identity. The main controversy of the music teacher's identity is the conflict between the identities of musicians and teachers. The controversy occurs when high expectations are set not to one, but to several roles performed by teachers. How does contemporary music teacher education meet the above-mentioned challenges? The situation is problematic because the law regulating higher education formed an unfavorable study model. Shorter study time from 5 to 4 years and no more than 7 subjects taken each semester. Such structure of studies limits the number of academic subjects and the amount of contact hours relevant to the formation of identity of both teachers and musicians. Applicants to study program of music pedagogy have inadequate preparation in terms of music, which makes it difficult to develop musical identities. Thank you. Identities shared during the 4 years of studies. Individual cases, playing an instrument, singing, conducting, are given on average 1 hour per week, which amounts 60 hours per year. The model of funding is the same as for teachers of other subjects. The dual specificity of the music teacher's profession is not taken in account. It looks like amateurs rather professional studies of music. What can be done? In music teachers' education, consolidated forces of musicians and pedagogues are necessary, focusing on the discussion about putting music knowledge and skill to practical in teaching music subjects and about developing and understanding of the music teacher's activity and music teaching specificity in teaching educational subjects. And the last idea is about research and project. Despite multi-phased and dynamic transformation, music education as a scientific area faced many challenges. Essentially, it is an interdisciplinary construct of music and education, requiring scholarly substantiation of art and science of both music and pedagogy. If one of the other became dominant, we risk weakening the discipline as unique object of academic inquiry. Secondly, contemporary requirements for music educations are more rigorous. While music education has been included in the area of social sciences, Emilija told in the first presentation, and has access to educational science research, there is a risk of separation from scholarly studies of music as an art form. Musical scholarship does not often examine music education forces as a vehicle of cultural changes. On the other hand, the requirements of conforming to research in the social sciences has important implications that force music education into certain research methodologies which often preclude a meeting of the minds with musicology. And again, what could be the ways of bringing the gap between these two areas of academic research? Initiation of interdisciplinary inquiry, exchange of research ideas between musicologists and music educators, specific tool to improve educational practices, and formation of unified concept of music education in Lithuania. And at the last slide, I put all those conclusions into one place and emphasize some sentences which, in my opinion, are very important and could be actions for us musicians and music educators. And as Emilija at the very beginning talked about divorce between musicology and music education, I hope that in future we will find ways for a marriage again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rūta, so much. We have for sure time for a couple of questions.
One of the things that I think is problematic is the requirements for academics to publish in certain publications, in certain languages. You only get points for publishing in non-Lithuanian journals that are Clarivate or Scopus. How has this impacted any kind of research and marriage of musicology and music, and what can be done to overcome this?
Yes, I would say that it is complex problem with research area. In one case, yes, maybe 8 from 10 my articles now I published in English, and I give for my students and colleagues to read only sketches which are prepared in Lithuanian. And we discussed a lot in foreign conferences, but not in Lithuania. And I don't remember conference where really scientifically music educational problems were developed. In one conference we have one separate sections and another separate sections, but it is quite difficult. Another thing I think is quite problematic that we are pushed to publish in high rating journals our articles, and to publish our works, it needs precisely work and really deep knowledge. And now we have no time and no possibilities for integration. And third thing is these projects which are funded by Lithuanian Academy of Science, and to prepare interdisciplinary project is very problematic, and you will never get funding. Simply you need to focus on one or another problem. And again, I repeat the idea that it is problem of our small country. And now we started discussion with the Ministry of Education and started discussion with Academy of Science of Lithuania from the part of Association of Educational Sciences letter. Yeah, it is general for all educators, and simply because it is not only for music, it is the same for all subjects. And what to do with our education, as our scientists send their results into foreign countries and foreign journals. And that's why we discussed about low quality of our educational processes, but all requirements, all regulations doesn't help it.
Thank you so much. I was now writing to Emilio Somili from Bolzano, and he was firstly he congratulates you for your all three of you for their very informative presentations, and he asked about elementary teachers training for kindergarten and primary school in Lithuania.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Thank you for the question. Again, we are a little bit jealous for big countries, which has opportunity to have separate study programs for early childhood music education or primary school music education. In Lithuania, we have one music education for all type schools and all ages. And our teachers have qualification to work with kindergarten's children, with primary school children, and with secondary school children. And the more problematic area is primary school, because according to the law, both musicians, music teachers, and generalists could teach music. And there are no statistics how many teachers, how many music teachers teach music in primary school, but I'm not sure. I suppose it is about 80%, because, and it is very, very difficult situation, because in primary school, Lithuanian children have 2 music lessons per week. And if generalists have no musical background, we know what results is of such music education. So, but we tried to make some steps to solve the situation. So, unfortunately, it was no success.
Thank you so much. We have some minutes more, and just one participant from line writes, I think now his or her question. So until we get this question, I would like also to ask, what about another small country, for example, like Latvia, who has common, let's say, geographical and cultural the contents.
In Latvia, the same problem, and in Lithuania, we have 4 high schools, high education schools, where music teachers training happened. In Latvia, now they have 1.5. I'm not sure about Daugpilis. I know that in Riga State only Academy of Music and Theatre, and they have the same problems. Little bit different situation in Estonia, and they have deep traditions in teachers' education, and they have teachers' education in university and in music academy, but only in Tallinn. So, and the same situation, music teachers can work in different institutions, from kindergarten to gymnasium.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes, and we have the next question from one delegate of one guest, online guest. Mm-hmm. I would like to know how the speaker intends that music education should make the historical research of musicology its own.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, when Emilija made presentation, I thought, yes, we have really very interesting period, Soviet period, and nobody wrote about this period, none from the music pedagogy, none about music pedagogy and musicology in music education. So, I would say that common project needed and common investigation needed, because those two areas need separate knowledge and separate analysis, method of analysis. Yeah.
I must say that was Carla Cuomo from Bologna University, Bologna.
Yeah.
One of the problems when we look at the Soviet era is we are not quite sure how to interpret the data from that area, and especially young people who have never had to understand the Aesop's language and all the undercurrents that we have in the texts. They have lost the ability to read beyond what is in the text, and for example, young doctoral students, they kind of avoid the Soviet era question because they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to research it. And I think this is not just a problem of music education, musicology. I think that's a research question that is very acute in all post-Soviet countries in any area. How do you research an era where there was so much lying and deceit? Where you can't take words for what they seem to be. Some scholars in Lithuania have even written a book saying that we need much more narrative style research to research this period. But again, here, like I tried to present in my presentation, when we talk about musicologists and musicians from that era, and when we look at that text, we can glean some knowledge. But people just, for example, I was in one doctoral dissertation in education, and they talked about the medieval period, the 19th century, then they kind of skipped the Soviet period because they didn't know what to do with it, and they went into 1918. So this is something that is really problematic throughout Lithuania in every area of life. We don't know how to interpret Soviet era data.
Thank you so much for your participation. Now we have finally a half an hour break for a coffee and to continue our discussion. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to start one more session today. It's session number 9. We are back from lunch, and in this session, we will have 3 presentations. The first one is by my colleague, Rūta Stanevičiūtė. She is a full-time professor at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre. She also implements some scientific projects. And this report is made in the frame of the project that Rūta is implementing together with Polish musicologists. So Rūta Stanevičiūtė will present her report titled Musical Dissensus, Informal Musical Communities and Affective Spaces in Soviet Lithuania.
Good afternoon, everyone, dear colleagues and friends. Thank you, Rima, for the kind introduction. In my presentation, I would like to share some insights from the development of a project, Music of Change, Cultural Expression of Liberation in Polish and Lithuanian Music Before and After 1989. In the title of project, together with my Polish colleagues, we opted for the term cultural expression of liberation. In fact, we chose that particular definition, liberation, as a reference to the need to reconsider the actors, agencies, and historical dynamic of cultural dissent to the political regime. Dramatic change in the concept of dissent after the fall of the Berlin Wall had been testified to by a wide range of definitions used to describe the process, from resistance and protest to opposition, nonconformism, alternative, autonomy, underground, and others that allow us for a much wider range of cultural phenomena to be covered. The joint project of the two countries supported the preliminary hypothesis that the expression and understanding of cultural resistance in the neighboring countries, Lithuania and Poland, had a national specificity. The joint project of two countries supported the preliminary hypothesis that the expression and understanding of cultural resistance in the neighboring countries, Lithuania and Poland, had a national specificity and was historically preconditioned, although there are moments of rhythmic synchronization between liberation processes of Lithuanian and Polish music cultures. A similar assessment of the processes in the communist bloc countries was provided by the scholars who had recently completed a giant project, Courage, Cultural Opposition and its Heritage in Eastern Europe, funded by Horizon program. They call for abandonment of a prescriptive definition of cultural opposition and promoted an analysis of cultural opposition with a more dynamic concept, which takes into account both the diversity of its meanings in various nation states and periods, and the fact that the concept of cultural opposition and its definitions is a historical product itself. The development of such attitudes make it relevant to reassess not only the boundaries of freedom and control in communist societies, but also the concepts of a relationship between music and politics. In this context, looking for a more dynamic models for the analysis of musical opposition, I found a very handy concept of dissensus of the French philosopher Jacques Rancière. Rancière highlights the difference between the two opposing categories, consensus and dissensus, through the differences in their logic. Characterizing the politics and aesthetics as a form of dissensus, Rancière argues that the opposition of these logics implies the effectiveness of both political and artistic activities. However, at the same time, art and politics are singular domains of human thought and activity, different areas that are brought closer together by the effect of their impact on redistribution of sensible. For Rancière, dissensus is not an institutional reordering. It has to do with reorientating general perceptual space and disrupting forms of belonging. Based on the logic of dissensus, the following directions of the transformative action of art can be distinguished: innovative potential to disrupt form of domination, belonging to a specific sensorium that forms an exception to the normal regime of the sensible, and the creative action to altering the realm of possible. Armed with the logic of dissensus, I intend to take a look at the Lithuanian musical culture of the late Soviet era. Here, for me as historian, the two things are important: the types of transformative action and the historical moments of transformative action. In fact, the logic of dissensus underpins activities that disrupt normal order, and therefore they flare up in certain historical situations to bring about change in the perception of social space. Historians Petrauskaitė and Gerd Rainer Horn have described such changes as a moments of opportunity and crisis. In the cultural studies of the communist bloc countries, such historical moments are usually associated with the dates of political history, and especially with the years 1945, 53, 56, and 68. Regarding the history of Lithuanian music, certain later events are also important: Perestroika in 1985 and the establishment of Sąjūdis Lithuanian Reform Movement in 1988 and consequently 1990. It is interesting to note that during the Soviet era, Lithuanian music historians mostly bypassed political events and did not indicate their impact on cultural renewal. But discrepancies of the USSR political history and musical processes have been pointed out by a number of Soviet music researchers in the post-Soviet period too, for example, our next keynote speaker, Peter Schmelz. In this way, on having chosen a different path, looking for the dissensus practices that transform the regime of a sensible, I will point out a few overlaps in musicological texts that deal with the perception of a radical break in the late Soviet era. Russian musicologist Tatyana Cherednichenko wrote about the period of 1974 through 1978 as a true beginning of the 1970s, a tectonic break in which seemingly undeniable truths based on the history of modern European composition have already slipped out of hand. Vita Gruodytė wrote in a similar way that the most important turning point in Lithuanian music took place, strange as it may seem, not after the restoration of independence in 1990, but in about the 1870s. To those comments based on the analysis of the change in composer creation, I would add important shifts in the self-organization of musical life. In the mid-70s, Polish musicologist Krzysztof Droba, at the time a young musicologist just starting his career, first organized independent music festivals in provincial towns of Poland. In 1985, similar initiatives were undertaken by young Lithuanian composers who were holding again independent festivals of contemporary music and happenings in Lithuanian provinces. In both countries, those were the first festivals to promote contemporary music that escaped censorship and clearly kept distance from the official musical life. These initiatives might be considered as artistic responses to the emotional climate of the communist bloc countries in the mid-70s, which indicated a change in the relationship between society and the state. Although not marked by such memorable political events as 1956 or 1967, it was a period of deep stagnation when the gap between the official discourse and the realities of public life and individual aspirations became particularly pronounced and apparent. Droba said that in the artistic life of that time, the divide between authenticity and falsehood, typical categories of artistic self-awareness at that time, became especially clear in both creative and musical life. The need for quality interpersonal communication and intense intellectual discourse brought together spontaneously emerging communities. Speaking of the late Soviet period, Russian émigré anthropologist Alexei Yurchak argued that intense personal communication was a special form of social closeness and intersubjectivity in the USSR with anti-systemic character. To provide you an example of that time musical descent, I would like to play some fragments from a performance by Lithuanian composer Vidmantas Bartulis, Mein lieber Freund Beethoven. It's 1980. So now it's with video again. Please let me know if you see on Zoom this. Is it okay? Gal sustabdom gerai ir sekančią skaidrę. Ir va šitą bus. Ten toliau bus. I have just to add that this performance was screened by national television in 1988, so it means in the Soviet time. In this context, networking as an important category for analysis of cultural descent deserves mention. According to the scholars of the above-mentioned Courage study, the questions of networking is crucial to understanding of interactions among different actors of a cultural opposition. Historian Petrauskaitė, who explored resistance processes in communist countries and the origins of the 1989 revolutions, linked the phenomenon of networking to a radical transformation of societies. In non-democratic regimes, every real action of national and especially transnational networking, crossing a border, holding a conference, even reading a foreign text or listening to Radio Free Europe was a symbolical act too, that changed the imaginary geography and perception of a living world. In the context of discussed phenomena, anthropological approach seems also very useful for interpretation of the musical activities of opposition. In search of collective in musical activities, music anthropologist K. Kaufman-Schellemey has offered concept of musical community and distinguished the three types of such community: descent community, sorry for my English, for me it's very difficult to pronounce in different ways, and affinity community. In the late Soviet era, musical cultures, the second one, descent community type, dominates, which is described by K. Kaufman-Schellemey as based solidly in opposition against an existing collectivity. For example, in 1983, Lithuanian writer Vytautas argued that at the time, not only social nonconformism was socially significant, but also other types of nonconformism, emotional nonconformism, linguistic nonconformism, and many other types of dissent activities. In addition, I would like to identify two types of networking that contributed significantly to the transformation of artistic and social life in Soviet Lithuania. In this case, I mean only the events of contemporary art music scene in the years of late socialism, since the jazz and popular music scenes had a different rhythm of change and opposition. The first type is a personal relationship-based network of non-systemic, spontaneous activity. Those members are linked by artistic and ethical attitudes, as well as the need to define their artistic and social identity as other and different with respect to the predominant artistic discourse. In this case, I mean not only the Lithuanian art space, but also the networks of musicians from other republics of the Soviet Union and neighboring countries. As an example of such network in Lithuania could be a group of musicians and intellectuals brought together by Osvaldas Balakauskas, which formed during the period in question from the mid-70s. They would meet privately and talk. According to Donatas Katkus, the disputes of those musicians would focus on the essential existential issues of music, its style and content. Bajoras could not stand sweet romanticism. Kutavičius used to say, "Pomposity makes me sick." We used to meet quite often and all kinds of people would come. Still, it used to be completely free reasoning. The attitudes and values of that milieu of musicians would come to the fore in such modes as, for example, the informal Apple price established by Osvaldas Balakauskas amounting to 4 rubles 99 kopeikas. Balakauskas would add 5 rubles to the chosen prize winner, chosen by himself, and the latter had to give him back a kopeika. Undoubtedly, this was demonstrative irony with regard to official culture. Incidentally, the Soviet Lithuanian state price was 1,500 rubles. It means worth about 100 average salaries at the time. The second type of networking was a network of more or less systemic activity, which manifested itself as forms of public artistic life, festivals, conferences, camps, expeditions, actions, clubs, public discussions, etc. This activity, again, in a very demonstrative way, kept distance from the official musical life and simultaneously had a continuity over a longer or shorter period of time. Although I mentioned the events initiated by young musicians in the provincial towns of Lithuania in the 1985 as the beginnings of independent contemporary music festivals, I would also add to systemic networking some more initiatives of organizing an alternative musical life. A good example would be a concert seasons from contemporary music initiated by Donatas Katkus and held in Lithuanian Artist Palace in Vilnius since 1981 that brought together young performers into chamber ensembles to perform Lithuanian and foreign music. While the programs of those seasons were extremely varied, from Tajik music to the US musical avant-garde, the symbolism of a venue, emotional climate were no less important. It can be said that at the time, the Artist Palace was an art-based alternative to the official scenes in the cultural life of the Soviet Lithuanian capital. And here is the picture of audience, not from this Swedish music concert, but from another, to make impression that the hall was very small. And probably Stanevičiūtė will add, it seems that in this Red Hall, it was one of the first performances of Kutavičius oratorios. So it means it was very close society, both performers and audience. In this way, the migration of public concerts, meetings, and debates from specialized formal cultural spaces to institutional peripheries with a non-specific function, as well as the organization of contemporary music festivals in provincial towns of Lithuania, formed as the consistent strategies of musical dissensus. Recalling the independent music festivals of the 1970s, Polish composer Eugeniusz Knapik emphasized the intensity, temperature, heat of meetings with art, and the height of the intellectual exchange and interpersonal communication in those events. Similarly, the emotional climate and the intensity of communication in youth festivals as a factors no less important than presentation of compositions were remembered by the first organizers and the old-timers of both events of Lithuania. Because of the time limits in my presentation, I mentioned only a small part of phenomena and events that allowed me to detect the logic of dissensus in the Lithuanian contemporary music scene during the late Soviet era. To conclude, I will not go into the broader generalizations and would just like to emphasize the importance of demonstrative symbolism and affective aspect on cultural opposition activities. And to make you impression of the dissent musical activities in Lithuania of the late 80s, I will play one more rare video fragment featuring the second happening festival near provincial Lithuanian town Anykščiai in 1988. And I will ask our technician to help me. So thank you very much for your attention, and my apologies for some technical imperfections.
Thank you, Rūta, for your presentation and also for giving us a more broad understanding based on some theoretical insights, explaining these networks, what was happening before the 90s. Having the privilege to moderate this session, I would like to ask first. Maybe it's like wondering, what about the collaborations or some connections with making such happenings or performances with the artists who were abroad? Not as I understand, all these happenings were made by Lithuanians here. Were there any connections with the Lithuanian immigrants who were outside Lithuania?
Many thanks, Rima, for your question. I think this question is to my colleague Vita Grodytė, who presented her paper about this happening in action and this independent festival movement. And also we have one of the members of this actions, Austėja Nakienė, and probably she could answer better. I think that, I don't know, Austėja, I think that it's very, was uncommon to invite international artists, yes, to this. I do not remember any international artists in the happenings festivals.
Some artists.
So if
some artists from Armenia
accidentally
took part in the one of the
on invitation or accidentally.
I don't know how they were informed, who invited them, but they came and they presented some ideas, and some happenings created by them were fulfilled during those festivals. There was some connection with colleagues from Latvia, but maybe no more contacts. The events were local, more local and underground. There was a spontaneous community, as you noticed, as you said.
Yes, you know, I think that one problem is that, in fact, I don't know, probably somebody will add something about this, but it seems to me that we until now have no documentation of that, no such a really, as for example, Kevin Karnes has done about this Latvian experimental movement. So we have only fragments of documentation from that time. That is why I just screened these two video fragments. And besides this happening festival, I would like probably pay more attention to the Bartulis performance. And for example, I have no how to say documented testimonies, but I have such a feeling that the inspiration, for example, for Bartulis was the instrumental theater of Mauricio Kagel. Because I remember that this generation was attending the Warsaw Autumn Festivals, and Mauricio Kagel had some performances in Warsaw Autumn Festivals. So sometimes it's really difficult. We follow our intuition also in our scientific papers.
I have to explain that the comment, a short comment from the audience was made by Austėja Nakienė. And I want to provide some questions that I see now in chat. And the first one is by Yanis Daugavietis. He is asking, were there any unofficial music samizdat editions in paper form in Lithuania during the Soviet era in academic music field?
Samizdat editions of music?
Yes, of academic music.
You know, I do not think that we had any official, unofficial publishing houses or something with samizdat in music field. I remember that, of course, that we have magnetizdat probably. It's better to speak about magnetizdat. It means about the some functioning and of musical non-official musical recordings, copies of recordings, some LPs and other type of recordings brought from Western countries. Yes, it was just we used to speak about more about magnetizdat. And of course, the copies of foreign scores was also important part of inspiration. But I do not remember any, probably some, every score, if some musicologist or other performer was interested, he could contact composer. Because really, it would be, I think it's another topic to discuss is the publication of Lithuanian music, because we never had really important publishing house in Lithuania in Soviet time.
Okay. One more comment and some insights were provided here by Edvardas Šumila. He was a student by Rūta here in Lithuania now. He lives and studies in New York. So here I would like to read his comment to be clear for the audience which is here. Thank you, Rūta, for a terrific presentation. I have one comment question which comes to my mind when thinking about this. I think dissensus is a capacious term and indeed conceptually seems to reflect the situation that you are investigating. However, for Rancière, dissensus is most valuable as the account of the relation between aesthetics and politics. It is, we should perhaps look into the substantial dimension of the art itself as an aesthetic gesture and thus contrast it to politics. That is where the dissensus actually emerges. Talking about, let's call it subversive politics versus status quo politics is not exactly a dissent relation. Or, in other words, the community is a part of normativity or discourse, but does not necessarily pertain to the aesthetics. So I wonder, how would you address this and how the examples you gave, in example Bartulis, you'd say pose the dissent? I mean not through political gestures, but through actual artistic practice.
Edwards, thank you very much for your long question and your comments. It's really, it will be probably a long discussion about that. I think I absolutely agree with you that for me, this concept of dissensus by Rancière was useful because of his distinction between politics area and aesthetics area. So that they are not because in art we have some dissensus, not because it art contains some political message, but because it's another some reality probably that is in always another comparing with everyday reality. So I think that I just was going to say, in fact, the same, that as you pointed, that artistic, it was inside this artistic discourse some practices of dissent, what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you, Rūta. We are running out of time, but because of some technical difficulties, I think we may have one more question. We may ask one more question for Rūta. And here I have a question from John Vandenberg. Could you expand upon the impact of Mein lieber Freund Beethoven? What was the cultural experience? Was it praised or censored, as Beethoven was an important figure?
John, thank you very much for your question, and thank you very much for all your questions. You've been the most active participant questioning and putting some different questions. So I think, I think that Bartulis, it was really important for him. It was important matches to make a choice with reference to Beethoven, because he used very known musical examples, and also message of Bartulis was also that for him himself as composer, it was very significant transformation from a neo-romantic composer to somebody featuring some evil problems or some. It was, I think, it was to some extent was traumatic creation, which by the end of Soviet Union opened some traumatic experience.
Yeah. Maybe any question from the audience? Okay, as we are running out of time, thank you, Rūta. And I would like to invite the second presenter, Danutė Petrauskaitė. She is going to talk about the letters of Vytautas Laurušas and Jeronimas Kačinskas. Her presentation is titled Dialogues of a Soviet Nomenklatura Representative with a Stray Bird. Danutė is a senior researcher at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre. She is an author of several monographs. Her research objects are the Lithuanian music, the culture of Lithuanian immigrants in exile. Also, she is the author of monographic texts about some Lithuanian composers. And this presentation is also the part of the project research, what Danutė is implementing right at this period. So I invite Danutė to present her. While waiting, I want to say that the object of this presentation, letters from Laurušas to Kačinskas, this epistolar treasure Danutė found when visiting USA. And because of Danutė efforts, all this material was brought to Lithuania. And now we will have the possibilities to examine all this archive. And Danutė quite often makes such presents to Lithuanian musicology, bringing here very valuable documents.
Why my paper is about Vytautas Laurušas? He still seems together with us, and maybe it is too early to speak about his beliefs and his path. But I decided to prepare this my report because of several reasons. First, that this year in spring marked the 90th birth of and 1 year death of Vytautas Laurušas. And the second reason is that we think that we know about, for us, it looks that we know everything about Laurušas. But when I read these letters, and I understood that it is not. And it is evidenced by these letters to a Lithuanian-American composer Jeronimas Kačinskas in the years of national revival. They give possibility to form a picture of how Laurušas lived and what he felt during the period of this historical turning point, the collapse of the USSR and the restoration of independent Lithuania. Laurušas grew up in Šiauliai in the family of excellent tailors and loving, attentive parents. They instilled Christian values, diligence, honesty, and a sense of responsibility in their son. Vytautas began studying music in 1944. He attended the piano and flute classes, but quickly realized that it was much more fun to extract sounds and produce melodies on the keyboard. Not only family, school, and friends influenced the maturing personality. During his childhood, and Vytautas kept close contact with Jesuits. He remembered, I quote, "I daily served at the Mass, influenced by the hymns of Julius Zeliūnas. I decided to write a hymn too. My first composition was the hymn to Jesus Christ the King, where both the music and lyrics were mine. More than one sentiment had been instilled into my heart: to forgive everyone, not to blame anyone, and to suffer wrong as trial sent by God. I learned tolerance, learned to get on with people and help them in good faith, and not to suspect anyone because it was humiliating." The Jesuits were kind of preparing Vytautas for a religion-related future. They promised to send him to study in Innsbruck and explained that he would be able to simultaneously study composition. It is difficult to say what would happen with him if the Soviet government had not closed the Jesuit church. It was like an omen encouraging Vytautas to choose the path of music, and he went to Vilnius. Laurušas graduated from the Lithuanian Conservatory, for several years worked as an editor and worked as a consultant for the Composers Union. Later he was invited to teach theoretical subjects at the conservatory. He did well everything because he fulfilled the ideological requirements of the time. In 1863, Laurušas was offered the position of director of the Opera and Ballet Theatre. Of course, the position could only be occupied by a member of Lithuanian Communist Party. Thus, Laurušas joined it in the same year. He realized that this way will lead to success. Of course, it was conformism, but the ambitions came true. After it, Laurušas led the Composers Union and Conservatory for many years, became a deputy of the Supreme Soviet of the Lithuanian SSR. Since 1980, he was a vice chairman of the Supreme Council. Thus, a romantic young man gradually turned into a part functionary and official and a nomenklaturist. However, otherwise he did not change. He loved people, always led a helping hand to those who needed it. People loved him too. As an administrator, Laurušas did not have much time for music, and he was not free to write what he wanted. As a communist, he had to prove his loyalty to Soviet system, therefore wrote a few ideological songs. But Laurušas liked modern music, new expressions of musical languages as dodecaphonia, rhetorics, coloristics. With his choral poem, Voices of the Night, he became known for not only in Lithuania, but in Europe too. As director of the theatre, Laurušas had to arrange for enough ideological works to be staged on the opera stage. Therefore, on the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution, he decided to write an opera himself about emigrants, which were called Stray Birds. This composition did not directly glorify the communist regime. It only revealed the lives of people who after war moved to the West and had not found happiness abroad because they did not stay in Soviet Lithuania. Some episodes of this composition became popular. The opera was shown for several years and even taken to Moscow. After the performance, the official newspaper of communists, Pravda, immediately drew readers' attention to the most important thing, the ideological significance of the opera. And now I will quote Pravda. Stray Birds is a story about the difficult fates of people who had lost their political orientation. At the time, the composer did not know that one of the stray birds will become his best friend in the future. During his administrative career, Laurušas did not get rich, but he became acquainted with influential people and stars of the art world in Soviet Russia. He had the opportunity to visit foreign countries and participate in high-level international events and music festivals, and could be attended only by party members or high-ranking composers. Moreover, he could both participate and hear his compositions performed. He had an extraordinary opportunity in 1988 after the perestroika had accelerated. In Boston that year, under the renewed treaty between the United States and the USSR, the Festival of the USSR Nations Making Music Together took place. A group of musicians going to Boston was formed in Moscow, led by composer Rodion Shchedrin. It consisted of 285 individuals, included 12 composers. Laurušas was among them. Irena Augustina Laurušinė, performer of his vocal compositions, accompanied him. However, he was not allowed to take along the Vilnius string quartet, which had played Laurušas' music more than once. Lithuanian Americans were very much looking forward to the performance of Laurušas' works and consistently called to Rodion Shchedrin and wanted to know more information. On the other hand, they use the event as an opportunity to protest against the occupation of Lithuania. Even before the opening concert of the festival, a crowd of protesters greeted the performers and listeners with shout, "Нет, нет, Soviet." Other picketers held posters with inscriptions such as, "The results of glasnost are easy to see in Boston theaters, not in Lithuania," or "Democracy yes, Marxism no." Three compositions of Laurušas, the string quartet, the cantata Flaming Night, and the concerto for voice and string quartet were performed on March 23 in the lobby of the Boston Opera House. The concerts were moderated by Moscow musicologist Leo Ginsburg, who invited the authors of the compositions onto the stage and asked them questions. Laurušas also had to answer them. At the beginning, he spoke Russian, but when he heard the voice from audience, "Vytas, speak Lithuanian," he continued his answers in his native language. This confused the Muscovites, who could not speak either Lithuanian or English. The chairman of the Lithuanian community in the era offered his service as an interpreter and managed excellently. That was Laurušas' first bold step. It is step aside as from the rules of communication abroad established for the citizens of the USSR. Due to that, both Laurušas and the performers received a storm of applause. Soon favorable reviews on his music were published by the main city newspapers as the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. The big surprise and joy for Laurušas was the presence of Jeronimas Kačinskas and his wife. Kačinskas, conductor and composer of Lithuanian modern music. Laurušas had heard about him from his professors Račiūnas and Dvarionas during his studies. Also, Laurušas did not have the opportunity to hear Kačinskas' music at the time. He created the images of the first Lithuanian modernist in his imagination, and that attracted him like distant star and helped to form a real image of the former music culture of independent Lithuania. After the concert, Laurušas hoped to see Kačinskas in the audience again, but the latter, together with his wife Elena, visited Laurušas at the hotel. A friendly conversation immediately ensued. It looked like a meeting of good friends who had not seen each other for a long time. Kačinskas invited Laurušas to his house in the Thomas Park, a very nice place in front in movement for American soldiers. Laurušas took a closer look at the environment in which expatriate composer lived and worked for many years and discussed a wide range of topics with him, from history and politics to latest music trends. When Laurušas returned to Lithuania, he admitted without hesitation that the strongest impression for this Boston festival was the meeting with Kačinskas. The image of stray bird also changed. Laurušas saw that also the lives of the immigrants were pervaded with nostalgia. They were active in Lithuanian activities, had faith in its rebirth, and enjoyed material well-being. Both musicians felt the need to continue discussions and began to correspond. Nostalgic memories of Boston ran through all Laurušas' letters. He was impressed by the warm welcome at Kačinskas' home. The latter also cherished that friendship and confessed, "It was a bright moment in the life of both of us." Laurušas' letters revealed that he had no true and sincere friends. For me, it was a very big surprise to read about it. For a number of years, he held high administrative positions, and consequently the instruments of power and influence in his hands. And he was surrounded not only by colleagues, students, but also by a flock of sham friends who kept making requests or even demanding for something, or who were secretly envious of him. Laurušas could not trust more of them. Therefore, Kačinskas became one of the closest person. Laurušas did not feel the age difference between himself and his new friend, who was more than 80 years old, and invited, almost in each letter, invited Kačinskas to visit Lithuania. On other hand, he hardly knew that Kačinskas, who had escaped from the Soviet regime, had promised never to set foot in occupied Lithuania. And he fulfilled his promise. He first came to his homeland in the autumn 1991, when the USA had already recognized Lithuania as an independent state, and then after it twice more in 92 and 93. In the table, you can see the most important events reported by Laurušas in his letters to Kačinskas. I tried at the beginning to read all the letters and then to do a table, do a list, special list about what Laurušas wrote to Kačinskas. At the time, choirs, orchestras, and individual performers became intensely interested in Kačinskas music. Laurušas was one of the first to inform his friend about premieres of his compositions and was doubly happy about it. First, that he could hear the music he had never heard, and second, that he knew its author personally. Not only music served as a connected link between Kačinskas and Laurušas, but also Lithuania, which Laurušas called our homeland. As can be seen, the letters covered a variety of topics that can be organized in several groups. The first and the most abandoned group consisted of descriptions of political events. They was due to two reasons. The first was Laurušas' own great attention to ongoing changes and his own participation in the political process. The second reason was the desire to indirectly involve Kačinskas in those processes so that he could feel the miracle of national rebirth. Laurušas' presentation of events was emotional and accompanied by a lot of comments. One of the most impressive cases in 1988 was the hosting of Lithuania flag on Gediminas Castle Tower, Laurušas wrote. You can imagine thousands of cars of the... You, Jeronimas, can really understand what great joy has flooded the hearts of all of us. Everyone cried. The tears rolled down the faces of both old and young. Tears of joy and pain were rolling, of joy that we all believe that finally all the misfortunes that have been plaguing our small nation have finally gone to the past and we are rising to a new life. Now, as we walk through the narrow streets of old Vilnius, we will be accompanied by tricolors flying in the wind of Gediminas Hill. In 1989, the Lithuanian Composers Union became an independent organization. Kačinskas was elected its honorary member, but the most impressive event of this year was a Baltic Way. Yes, you then can see this table. And what Laurušas wrote about the Baltic Way. You can imagine thousands of cars of Vilnius-Riga highway in the afternoon. In evidence, each city and district were allocated certain sections of the road to be filled by people holding hands. A light breeze flooded numerous tricolors tied with black ribbons. About 2 million people took part in the entire Baltic Way from Vilnius Gediminas Hill via Riga to Tallinn's Old Thomas Belfry, a total 790 kilometers. You, Jeronimas, cannot imagine what a magnificent view it was. A particularly important event occurred in 1990. Laurušas wanted that Kačinskas to know it as well, and simultaneously was afraid to send a letter from Lithuania so that you would not get lost or fall into the hands of the Soviet security service. He handed it to one of his colleagues going to Spain, and the letter successfully reached Boston. In it, Laurušas confessed to his friend that he had left the Lithuanian Communist Party and explained why he had been a member of so many years. I left the ranks of the Communist Party for a few months ago. I am now a not non-party man. The wave of liberalism, which briefly burst during Khrushchev's reign, brought a large part of the creative intelligentsia to the Communist Party. 99% of all those who joined the party of the time did it not because they went along with the ideas or admired the prospects of establishing a communist regime, but wishing at any cost to preserve the deep traditions of Lithuanian culture and to strive for conditions preventing complete deviation from the achievements of Western European culture. In the first post-war presidential elections in Lithuania, held in 1993, Laurušas refused to support the candidates of Algirdas Brazauskas, chairman of the Lithuanian Democratic Labour Party from the former communists, and therefore did not hesitate to vote for the neutral candidate Statisys Lozoraitis. He was greatly upset when Lozoraitis received only 38% of the votes. Laurušas also took a negative view of the elections to the famous of the Republic of Lithuania when the LDLP candidates won the most of votes. He saw Lithuanian slump during the LDLP rule and wrote to Kačinskas about the passive president, rural communities ruined by excessive drinking, growing crime he experienced personally. On 27 October 1995, in the middle of the day in Vilnius, he was attacked by several hooligans on one of the central streets. The composer did not allow him to be robbed, but he was hit on the head and had his front teeth knocked out. He was most affected by the fact that no one came to the rescue. Laurušas blamed the LDLP for such a situation and the moral decline of people. He wrote, "The behavior of the neo-communist government is strange. So many facts are reported in the press about corruption and about the relationships between the organized crime and the government, and the public does not receive any fact-based denial from the government. In the Seimas, the LDLP has a majority. Nothing prevents them from passing strict laws to return the country to normal living conditions, but they do not do that." Laurušas often mentioned the last 3 slides. Laurušas often mentioned the name of God in his letters, sometimes several times in one letter. He prayed to God and asked him to give health to his best friend and to allow them to meet many more times for himself. He asked for time to implement all his creative ideas. During the Soviet years, Laurušas, like most Lithuanians, celebrated Catholic holidays as Christmas and Easter. Once walking past an art shop in Vilnius, he stepped in and saw an image of Jesus woven in linen. The painting was so spiritual and encouraging to pray that it immediately got engraved in his memory. Laurušas could not forget that image either day or night, and he decided to buy the piece of art and send it to Boston. And Kačinskas and Daina were very happy, of course. When the wounds inflicted by the attackers healed, Laurušas viewed the situation from a philosophical perspective. He wrote, "I am well now and just having to go through the dental implant procedure. I have done some thinking and conclude that it is God's rebuke for all my sins." Laurušas did not write much about music. The topic became more relevant in 1994 when his second term as the rector ended. For a while, the composer felt confused after more than 3 decades of responsible position at the Lithuanian Opera and Ballet Theatre, the Composers Union and Lithuanian Conservatory. He felt as if he was no longer necessary. You know, Jeronimas, I often think that it is detrimental for a composer to do administrative work. You can put a lot of efforts into this work, but you won't get any thanks. Meanwhile, creation is a certain value that no one can destroy. What you have done accumulated into capital that everyone must reckon with, whether they like it or not. Such thoughts visit me now after I have devoted half of my 68 years of age to administrative activities. When I think about it, a lot has been done in this area, and opera house has built. I led the first bricks, smashed a bottle of champagne, and led the ceremony of opening the new theater building. In the Composers Union, on my initiative and under my leadership, a composer's house in Vilnius and a residential house in Druskininkai have been built. However, I'm not looking forward to any thanks, and I received them from no one. Everyone accepts it as if everything has been done without special effort and energy. These are the thoughts after leaving the administrative work. On the other hand, after the last 25 years of his life, Laurušas wrote much more compositions than before before 1994. And the conclusions. The Laurušas return to the fundamental phenomena of being seemed to have framed his worldview. It could be compared to a 3-part form as ABA1, which reveals the experienced inner dramas and the marks left by historical eras. Laurušas' letters are valuable as a personal diary and as a yearbook of Lithuanian revival. They can be useful for studies of Lithuanian music culture and help to understand more clearly the experiences of artists during the collapse of Soviet regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Danutė, for your presentation and for sharing with us these epistolial writings between Laurušas and Kačinskas, or the letters from Laurušas to Kačinskas. We would like to ask some questions from the audience and from the chat. One from the chat comment already I see, but maybe any questions from the audience? Okay, Girdzijauskienė.
Danutė, I understood that they did not discuss questions on music, on creative process, nothing, absolutely process, questions only about politics, events, etc., but nothing about composition.
No. In the latest period, after 1994, Laurušas wrote. It is included in this list of topics. Laurušas wrote what he are doing, what the compositions are writing. It was the polyphony of colors, and Kačinskas asked him, how you can create according colors, white prelude, white fugue, and then Laurušas explained what the colors means for him, how he imagined, for example, orange color or green color. So it was in the later letters, but not very much about music. At that period, music was not so important as political events.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would like to forward a comment by Rūta, who wrote her comment in a chat. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. It explains the openness of mind of Laurušas. After the scandalous work of Mažulis and Kabelis, Auksaspalvis in 1986. In the Great Hall of Conservatory, Laurušas did not forbid this kind of performances within an academic structure, saying that he supports the stylistic freedom of young musicians. While being in the system, he supported the transformations. In this sense, his role was very important.
Oh, thank you, Rūta. You answered it yourself at your questions, and I can only say, yes, you are right. Maybe you remember these elections of to the rector of conservatory when Donatas Katkus said that, we have to finish with time of Laurušas. We have to stop with it. But no one wanted to, except Juzeliūnas, maybe one who wanted to be a rector. and I think that Juzeliūnas, after some time, he decided not to be candidate to the rectors, and then again, rectors started to lead conservatory, and therefore he had two full periods, 8 years, but he felt not very good after when he had to go out from this conservatory stage, because he felt that he is necessary.
Yes. And looking at the letter that you provided in one of the slides, you wrote that this is the first letter from Laurušas to Kačinskas, and he in this letter writes that he already received a letter from Kačinskas, yes, while returning from Boston. And it's really amazing to see that Laurušas already writes appealing in Lithuanian too. It's personal appeal, like in English you, but in singular form.
Yes. So, for me it was difficult to explain you, because in English you is tu and you is use. And when I started to read these letters, for me it was, I shocked. Laurušas wrote tu, Jeronimai, tu, you. As in one person, you. And later I knew that Kačinskas asked himself not to say you, Lithuanian, use. And American Lithuanians also don't like when you say use, because they say, we are our, kur mes, we are our. I am alone. Why you say use? So it is difficult behavior between us, because we want to be polite and we say use.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And one more question from the audience, Jūratė Katinaitė.
It's not a question, just a comment, because once I already have a part in such a discussion about tu and use in Lithuania. So during the first independence in Lithuania, use it was not used. It was used tamsta
yes.
tu.
Yes, and I know one my colleague, he also all time in beginning tas tamsta. Yes, I agree, but they don't use tamsta. But I could compare Kačinskas letters with other letters of other composers. For example, Andreevas, Urbaitis, musicologists wrote, but they never say tu or tamsta, only dear professor.
So we would like to thank Danutė for the presentation and for this sharing of Laurušas' minds. And now the time for the third presentation. Sorry for running out of time, but now I would like to invite Daina Urbanavičienė. She will present a talk about Lithuanian jazz situation. And this report will make some kind of bridge to the keynote lecture that we will hear this evening by Peter Schmelz. And also this is a link to one of tomorrow's presentations by Estonian musicologist Rima, who will talk about the Tallinn Jazz Festival. Daina Urbanavičienė is a PhD student at the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre. At the moment, she is investigating the jazz culture, jazz situation in Lithuanian Soviet times and as institutional phenomena. I would like, while Daina is arranging her slides, I would like to present more Daina. She is also the chairwoman of the Lithuanian Council for Culture and is responsible for the creation of conditions for versatile development and dissemination of culture and arts. And today, the title of Daina Urbanavičienė is Jazz, Culture and Cultural Liberation in Soviet Lithuania.
Good afternoon to everybody. Today's my presentation is linked to my PhD studies on jazz scene identity and its transformation in Lithuania, establishing jazz as a new artistic musical expression in Lithuania since the 20th century to the 20th end. Despite the intensive development of national jazz, this field of Lithuanian music is included in scientific research very rarely. In a small number of scientific studies, the stylistic development of Lithuanian jazz analyzes more often and the actual material summarized. My research aims to develop an approach based on sociocultural studies of the music, the construction of identity which always occurs within a distinct historical, social and cultural context. Musical identity development revealed through the influence of the Soviet time socio-historical and cultural context. Humanities usually apply the method of narrative research narrative identity, the social constructionist approach in gathering information about various phenomena, events, processes of the Soviet era, and in researching or interpreting them. Usually human memory and the instruments that help to speak are used in the face of a lack of archival documents to obtain qualitatively unique information not recorded in any other historical source, or to perform a reconstructive action of the past in which the researcher and his source interviewer unit efforts to try to answer the questions: how was it? What do they think about it now? What is the meaning of the past for us living here and now? The action of its recreation and the result of this action. Is it a new story? Jazz personalities, groups, and community are discussed how our identities are socially constructed. An important aspect here is that the development of individuality in a totalitarian society is radically different from the development of democratic societies. As an individual born in totalitarian Soviet society, he found his way into jazz music. How? What does it mean to grow and to prove in totalitarian society? How do you construct your stories? What are the meaning of their stories? Today we can probably talk about a certain hunger of the Soviet era researchers and the need to rethink argue, interpret. There are more and more discussions, public lectures, published memories and interviews about how we perceive the everyday life of the Soviet era and what relationship we built with it. In researches, this epoch emerges as a multifaceted, sometimes paradoxically absurd, and challenging to submit to any scientific generalizations. It's no coincidence that jazz music also indirectly played an important role in the path of Lithuania's liberation. Jazz was and still is a messenger of freedom around the world, so it's natural that in Lithuania, especially during the Soviet era, jazz reflected the need for freedom and freedom for expression. It was a challenge for the system because modernity, uniqueness, and liberalism were crucial elements of the jazz improvisational creative scene. The development of jazz scene in Lithuania can be called a reflection of the development of the world jazz music. It is a concentrated history of this music against the background of political ideology. With communist ideology in Soviet time, culture was one of the areas where opposition to such a system could form. Thus, music played a unique role in this hidden criticism, as it was not difficult to give meaning to instrumental work. Jazz was particularly appropriate as a channel for hidden rebellion. One of the most important questions, which will probably remain unanswered, is since when it has been possible to listen to professional jazz music in Lithuania. Also, it is known that in the 1930s, in the restaurants and cafes in the city of Kaunas, like Metropolis, Versailles, popular melodies of traditional American jazz were played, but whether it was improvised, it remains to be guessed, because the recordings didn't survive. You see the poster from Restaurant Versailles, and I will translate the text of this poster. This poster is from 1930s. Restaurant Dancing Club Versailles, the most modern, most beautiful dancing club in Lithuania, always the best foreign and local revue program, favorite chapel of Versailles led by Borstein, at the piano virtuoso jazz pianist Dennis Laszlo. In the post-war years, due to Soviet ideology, this type of music almost disappeared. After Khrushchev political warming, attitudes toward jazz began to change. In 1957 was founded Lithuanian Pop Orchestra, which was conducted by Juozas Tiškus, the first professional ensemble from which the jazz began to become popular. Also, this ensemble mostly accompanied singers performing popular melodies, and ensemble repertoire also included instrumental jazz music. Professional musicians, not only from Lithuania but also from other Soviet places, played in this orchestra. Records from 1965 testify to the orchestra mastery. Now we can listen of orchestra recording. Oh, sorry. After rock popularity, interest in jazz has waned, but the new impetus was Ganelin Trio. In 1974, Trio acquired that status of National Philharmonic Ensemble. Trio was one of the first jazz ensembles in the Soviet Union and was named the Lithuanian State Philharmonic Contemporary Chamber Music Ensemble. Eventually, the trio entered all European and American jazz encyclopedias, marked the history of Lithuanian jazz, with world fame, gave one of the greatest impulses to the evolution of the free jazz genre. The phenomenon of the Ganelin Trio, which performed its mission, is the reason why the so-called mainstream of Lithuanian jazz is free improvisation and avant-garde. Foreign interest in Lithuanian jazz music was given a boost by the very successful performance of the trio at the International Jazz Festival Jazz Jamboree 76 in Warsaw. The POCO program has received the highest ratings from foreign critics and listeners. The Polish press wrote, "The biggest surprise was the concert of the Soviet jazz trio. We waited for this appearance for several years, and not in vain. The contemporary chamber music group of the Lithuanian State Philharmonic is one of the most interesting groups in the European music map. It is intuitive music, free jazz associated with traditions." American musicologist, journalist, jazz musician, composer Chris Kelsey named trio the best free jazz ensemble in the world in the 1980s and the 1990s. The trio was driven by uncontrollable inner protest. Jazz gave trio the freedom to develop its style and a means of expression for this protest. Leo Fagin, the Russian immigrant who founded Leo Records in London in 1979 to release the trio music, concluded that improvised music is the only art that cannot be censored. By definition, improvisation is invented right on the spot at the very moment you hear it. Such music was provocative in the Soviet system. During my research, I keep relationship with trio musicians, with Vyacheslav Ganelin, Vladimir Tarasov, and Vladimir Chekasin. We had several discussions about that period. We're talking about a lot of events and processes of during Soviet period, and there are some quotations from my discussions to each of one. So Vyacheslav Ganelin said that jazz was like a virus that infected young people throughout the Soviet Union. I started participating in jazz festivals in 1964. I met many musicians from different places, and they all wanted to play the same, jazz. And Vilnius had provided a place to produce free jazz, a place where musicians could improvise freely. Vladimir Tarasov, I know only one thing, neither in Moscow nor in St. Petersburg this would not be possible. We found our style. Vladimir Chekasin, jazz is a language, not a style and not a concept, and everyone has their style, their languages, intonations, insight. John Cumming, founder of the London Jazz Festival, said in an interview, there is a record company in the UK called Leo Records. Leo somehow managed to get recordings of underground musicians from the Soviet bloc states. Their work was a mixture of jazz, improvisational, and sometimes traditional music. Through it, I also discovered the Ganelin trio. How else could I have done that? I don't know how Leo managed to get those recordings out of the Soviet Union, I suspect by smuggling, but in the end, those musicians were heard in the West and even found ways to perform here. I think it also led to the changes, albeit slow, that began in the Soviet bloc. How had people in Soviet Lithuania managed to hear this music? The Iron Curtain was acoustically permeable, thus attenuating the huge structural intervention into the European sphere of communication that took place as a result of the formation of Soviet and Eastern Bloc. Foreign radio stations such as Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and Radio Liberty played a significant role. Especially Willis Conover's program Jazz Hour was sent out over the airwaves every evening, and it represented a window into the world of jazz for young people in the Soviet and Eastern Bloc. Cafes and clubs sprang up in many Lithuanian cities and other Soviet cities. In 1962, the youth cafe Vilnius Jazz Club appeared in Vilnius, the first cafe not only in Lithuania but also in the Baltic states. Paradoxically, there was not a single purely ideological event in this cafe, set up by the communist youth for all cafe existing years. The long but narrow cafe was quite cramped, seating only about 50-60 people, but during popular events, especially jazz concerts, some visitors had to stand or sit on the floor. The KGB soon became interested in this youth cafe, and from the KGB archives, I will quote, in October 1962, a group of young people was unveiled in Vilnius, secretly listening to Western modern jazz, music recordings and making records, gathering in private apartments and the youth cafe, admitting nationalist conversations, telling anti-Soviet anecdotes and behaving very immoral. Another music scene spread rapidly, centering around Vilnius Cafe Neringa, in addition to hosting jazz musicians every night during the 1960s, Cafe Neringa was an important meeting place for the guests along from other parts of the Soviet Union. In Vilnius, this niche developed in the form of the jazz scene. Visitors from other countries related to this phenomenon. Joseph Brodsky, a Russian poet and essayist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1987, he was several times a visitor of Neringa Cafe and had personal contacts with Lithuanian intellectuals and jazz musicians. He loved to say that Lithuania, for a Russian person, is always a step in the right direction. Another important event in Lithuania that in 1968, the first jazz festival took place in Lithuania town Elektrėnai. It was the first such event in Lithuania and the second in the Baltic states after Tallinn Jazz Festival. Photographer Vytautas undertook to recreate the history of this unique event, and he has released the book of this jazz festival. And the organizer of this festival, Viktoras Voronovas, in his memory said, "A miracle has happened because for those who know the circumstances of the time, this made him both unbelievable and strange to have the possibility to make such jazz festival." And instead of the conclusions, because it's my research insights, jazz wasn't only music, but a means of communication that transcended borders and which was laden with a variety of cultural symbols. Trio managed to be a part of that world with its freestyle music. The jazz musicians were not only an axis of freedom, the axis was also the audience, usually sitting in the cafes and clubs, listening to jazz, people who had a wide range of social network influence that could spread the free word to people who wanted the freedom. The US jazz program Jazz Hour created a window into the world of jazz for young people in the Soviet and Eastern Bloc. And I want to point out that during the Cold War, jazz became a political sound weapon used by the United States to destabilize the political systems of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Jazz, as a symbol of freedom and democracy, was expected to dispel the negative image of racial problems within the United States. But jazz has been interpreted differently in different parts of the world. When jazz was turned into a political weapon, the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries responded with creative countermeasures. The more jazz was banned in communist countries, the more it became the music of freedom and resistance. Historian and musicologist Rüdiger Ritter stressed that despite Vilius Konover's Jazz Hour program million followers in the Soviet and Eastern Bloc, the jazz community still did not openly protest against the social and political situation in those countries at the time. It's important to understand how both the Cold War states defined and applied the concept of freedom. The United States broadcast the idea of political freedom, and the Soviet Union longed for personal freedom. In other words, members of the jazz scene associated the concept of freedom not so much with political freedom as with meaning of freedom that no one could control. Freedom meant improvisation, the joy of playing, and the desire to experiment. Most jazz musicians in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc adhered to the motto, just do it, and guided their ideas despite actual, imagined, or potential resistance. The structure of the jazz scene in each Eastern Bloc country depended on the nature of the political system. So thank you. I wanted to hurry up.
Thank you, Daina. You are very in time. But also you provided lots of information, lots of facts that make a sense about the situation up to 1990s. And if I may, my comment would be also, as I use my privilege to comment first. You mentioned the first jazz festival, Jaunystė, that happened in 1968. Also that Ganelin Trio was officially included in the activity of Lithuanian National Philharmonics in 1974. But it's interesting, as you emphasized too, that then this ensemble was called Contemporary Chamber Music Ensemble, not jazz. Jazz was like somehow forbidden word. And thinking about what happened already after 1990s, that we had to wait more than 10 years when the cathedral department of jazz music was established at Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre only in 2002. And Ganelin Trio they were awarded the national prize only in 2016. So this institutional recognition was not so very, very fast after the regaining independence. So that was like a comment. Maybe you may comment also too here.
I agree with you. It's a little bit pity because the research on jazz in Lithuania, we have no solid researches, so I would like to make it, and it's a challenge for me because there is no much documents, and my important what I want to make now. I'm doing many interviews with musicians, especially from Soviet time, because they have respectable age, and they have private archives and published documents, photos. So I would like to make a collection of this unpublished documents, and maybe the jazz would be more how to say more matomas,
publicized,
visualized in Lithuanian music history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Of course, we are running out of time. It's time for coffee break. And in chat, just now, John Van der Wert wrote a point that there is a point by Richard Taraskin that Russian music was just a modified Western version. In your opinion, did Lithuania create their own style or just adopt a European version? Sorry.
As I mentioned, we have phenomenon, the Ganelin Trio, and they created the free jazz Lithuanian style. So we have our style, free avant-garde style.
Yeah,
I think it was about jazz question.
Yeah, that was a question about jazz style. Yes, and Tarasov emphasized, as you showed in your slide, that they created their own style. They found their own style. Yeah. So I would like, I see Rūta Stanevičiūtė wants to make a comment or to ask.
Yes, thank you, Daina, for your presentation. You mentioned that you did some field work, yes, and as I understood, you are interested in oral history. And did you interview the listeners of that time?
Yes. For me, it's very interesting to talk with jazz collectors. And now I keep a relationship and I make discussions with Jonas Žiburkus and Valdas Neniškis. So I will publish maybe one day the interview, because what I'm talking, it's very interesting, very intriguing. And of course, they have very much interesting unpublished information in the private collection. Yes, of course, I interview.
So we are waiting for the publication.
I will try.
Yes. So I would like to thank Daina. I would like to thank all session presenters and all the audience here live in the hall and online in remote regime. Now we have more than 10 minutes coffee break, and then we'll be back to listen to Peter Schmelz's keynote lecture about Ganelin Trio that was already introduced here by Daina. So see you soon.